The world had always known me as unbreakable. The voice, the smile, the woman who never missed a note, never let her hand shake, never showed the cost of carrying so much expectation for so long. That's what they believed. That's what I helped them believe. But there was a day when holding it all together became heavier than letting it fall apart. I remember the exact moment the Cracs appeared, not on a stage, not under bright lights, but in a quiet space where there was nowhere left to hide. It wasn't dramatic in the way people imagine. No screaming headlines. No sudden collapse. Just a slow realization that perfection had been a performance, and I was exhausted from playing the role. That day, I didn't lose my voice. I stopped using it as armor. Fame teaches you how to shine, but it never teaches you how to rest. Every smile becomes a promise. Every silence becomes suspicious. And every crack feels like a failure instead of what it really is, proof that you're human. I had spent years being strong for everyone else. Stronger than I felt. Stronger than I should have been. And when I finally allowed myself to be seen without the polish, without the control, without the rehearsed answers, the world didn't know what to do with me. Neither did I. This is the story of that day. The day I stopped pretending I was made of glass and admitted I was made of flesh and feeling. The day the Cracs didn't destroy me, they told the truth. Stay with this story. What happened after I let the Cracs show changed everything. If this moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. I woke up that morning already tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, but the deep, aching exhaustion that settles into your bones when you've been holding yourself together for too long. The curtains were still drawn, the room dim and quiet, but my mind was already loud. Schedules. Expectations. Faces I'd have to smile for before noon. Questions I'd answer without actually saying anything. Another day of being Whitney Houston. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing. Even that felt monitored, like somewhere in the back of my head there was a voice reminding me to protect it. Don't strain. Don't whisper too much. Don't lose control. My voice wasn't just mine, it was an investment. A brand. A promise. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up slowly. My reflection caught my eye in the mirror across the room. Hair perfect. Skin flawless under soft light. A woman who looked like she had everything handled. I didn't recognize her. That day was supposed to be simple. A rehearsal. A press appearance. Nothing I hadn't done 1,000 times before. Everyone kept telling me it would be easy, which usually meant I wasn't allowed to feel anything complicated. Downstairs, the apartment was already busy. Voices. Footsteps. The quiet hum of people doing their jobs around me. Someone handed me coffee. Someone else reminded me of timing. Another person asked if I was feeling good today. I smiled. Always. That word had become my shield. On the drive to rehearsal, I watched the city pass by through tinted windows. People walking freely, laughing, arguing, living without knowing how carefully I had to measure every step. I wondered what it would feel like to move through the world without being watched, without being interpreted. At the venue, the lights were already on. Bright. Unforgiving. The stage waited like it always did, familiar, demanding, honest in a way people rarely were. The band was warming up, the sound echoing through the empty seats. I took my place at the microphone. Whenever you're ready, someone called out. I nodded. I was always ready. That was the problem. The first note came out clean. Strong. Exactly what they expected. Heads nodded. Someone smiled with relief. The machine was working. The Cracs hadn't shown yet. But inside, something felt off. Every note after that felt heavier, like I was stacking bricks on a structure that was already strained. My chest tightened. Not from lack of breath, from restraint. From holding back everything I wasn't allowed to let spill out. Between songs, I laughed lightly, made a joke. Everyone relaxed. Whitney was fine. Only she wasn't. During a break, I stepped away from the stage and sat alone in a quiet corner. I pressed my fingers together, noticing a faint tremble I hadn't felt before. Or maybe I had, and just never allowed myself to acknowledge it. A thought slipped in, uninvited and dangerous. What if I stop trying to be perfect? The idea scared me more than any bad review ever had. Perfection was what kept me safe. It was what kept people comfortable. If I let the cracks show, what would be left? Someone called my name again. Time to go back. Time to sing like nothing was wrong. I stood up, smoothing my clothes, lifting my chin. The image reassembled itself automatically. Years of practice kicked in. But as I walked back toward the stage, I felt it, a small fracture, almost invisible, forming beneath the surface. And I knew, with a clarity that made my heart race, that this day wasn't going to stay contained. The cracks had already started. I just didn't know yet how much they were about to reveal. The rehearsal ended exactly the way everyone wanted it to.
Clean. Polished.
Efficient. People clapped softly out of habit, not celebration. Schedules were checked. Notes were taken. Someone told me I sounded incredible, stretching the word the way people do when they need reassurance more than truth. I thanked them, nodded, smiled. All the right motions, perfectly timed. Inside, I felt hollow. Back in the dressing room, the door closed behind me with a final click that sounded louder than it should have. The room smelled faintly of makeup and warm lights. Costumes hung neatly along the wall, each one chosen to represent a version of me the world felt comfortable with. I sat down and stared at my hands. They were still trembling. I tried to steady them by pressing my palms together, willing the movement to stop. It didn't. That scared me. My body was doing something I hadn't approved. For years, control had been my survival skill. If I could control the voice, the image, the timing, then maybe I could control the chaos underneath. But something was slipping. A knock came at the door. 5 minutes, someone called. Okay, I answered, my voice steady enough to pass. I stood up, took a deep breath, and looked in the mirror again. The woman staring back at me looked flawless. But her eyes were different now. There was a tightness there, a question forming behind them. How long can you keep this up? I thought about all the times I'd been told to push through, to ignore the ache,
To sing anyway.
the show must go on, a phrase that had followed me everywhere, whispered like a prayer and a threat at the same time. When I stepped back into the hallway, the noise rushed in. People talking, phones ringing, laughter that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. I moved through it all like I always did, floating just above the ground, untouched. Or so it looked. We drove to the next commitment in silence. I watched the city blur past again, but this time it felt closer. Too close. My chest tightened, and I pressed a hand against it, hoping no one noticed. You okay? Someone asked from the front seat. Yes, I said automatically. The word tasted bitter. At the venue, the energy was different. Louder. More impatient. This wasn't rehearsal. This was where expectations demanded to be fed. I could feel it the moment I walked inside, the invisible weight of being needed to deliver something extraordinary. Backstage, a producer pulled me aside. We're going to need you at 100% tonight, he said, lowering his voice. There's a lot riding on this. I looked at him and realized he didn't mean me. He meant numbers.
Deals.
Optics. I'll do my best, I replied. He smiled, satisfied. Best had always been enough for them, as long as it looked effortless. Minutes before I was supposed to go on, I stood alone near the curtain. The sound of the crowd seeped through the walls, a familiar roar that used to energize me. Tonight, it felt like pressure building behind glass. I closed my eyes and tried to ground myself. Breathe in. Breathe out. Find the center. Instead, a wave of emotion rose unexpectedly. Exhaustion, frustration, sadness, all tangled together. My throat tightened, not from fear of singing, but from the effort of holding everything back. For a split second, I imagined stepping away, letting someone else go on, letting the night happen without me. The thought felt dangerous and relieving. The stage manager touched my arm. It's time. I nodded and took one step forward. That's when it happened. A sharp dizziness hit me, sudden and undeniable. The world tilted slightly, just enough to remind me I wasn't invincible. I grabbed the edge of a nearby table to steady myself, my heart racing. No one noticed. They never do, not until it's too late. I straightened up, forced a smile, and walked toward the stage as the lights came up. But something had changed. The Cracs were no longer forming quietly. They were demanding to be seen. The applause hit me before the music did. It rolled through the venue like a wave, loud and full and expectant. From the outside, it probably looked like I was absorbing it, feeding off it the way I always had. My feet moved forward. The lights found me. The band waited. But inside, there was a strange quiet. I stood at the microphone and let the moment stretch just a little longer than usual. The crowd settled, sensing something different, even if they couldn't name it. I wrapped my fingers around the mic stand, grounding myself in the cold metal.
Then I sang.
The first note came out clean.
Strong.
Familiar. Relief flickered through me, brief but real. Muscle memory took over, carrying me through the opening lines. The audience responded instantly. Cheers, hands in the air, faces lifted toward the stage like this was church. I gave them what they came for. At least, that's what it looked like. Between verses, when the band carried the melody and my voice was momentarily absent, the quiet rushed back in. Not the quiet of the room, but the one inside my chest. Heavy, pressing, demanding attention. I realized something terrifying in that space. I didn't feel connected to the sound coming out of me. It was as if my voice had become its own thing, performing on instinct while I watched from a distance. I smiled on cue. I moved when the music swelled. I hit every note they expected me to hit. But I wasn't there. Halfway through the song, my breath shortened. I adjusted without anyone noticing, shifting my stance, compensating the way professionals do. Years of training had taught me how to hide strain behind control. The audience heard power. I felt effort. As the song ended, the crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the space, echoing off the walls. People stood.
Some cried.
Phones were lifted, capturing a version of me that would live forever on screens. I nodded in gratitude, pressing a hand to my chest. If only they knew how close that heart felt to breaking. The next song began, slower this time. More exposed. The kind of song that requires you to feel as much as sing. As the first notes played, a memory surfaced uninvited, a younger version of myself, singing not for crowds or contracts, but because it made me feel alive. The contrast hit hard. My voice softened, trembling just enough to be mistaken for emotion rather than instability. The audience leaned in. They always loved vulnerability, especially when it looked intentional. But this wasn't a performance choice. This was real. A single lyric caught in my throat, and for a split second, no sound came out at all. Time slowed. My mind raced. I adjusted, pushed through, filled the silence before anyone could name it. Most people didn't notice. I did. By the final note, my body was buzzing with adrenaline and something else, a warning I didn't want to hear. When the song ended, the applause felt farther away, muffled, like I was underwater. I thanked the crowd, my voice steady again, and exited the stage exactly as planned. Backstage, the noise dropped instantly. The door closed. The world shrank. I leaned against the wall, breathing harder than I should have been. My hands were shaking again, worse this time. Someone handed me a towel, smiling, congratulating. "That was amazing," they said. "You are incredible." I smiled back. Incredible. The word echoed hollowly. As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion crashed in its place. Not the good kind, the earned tiredness after a great performance, but a deep, bone-level fatigue that made standing feel like work. I sat down, head in my hands, and for the first time that night, I didn't try to hide it. A thought surfaced, clear and frightening. What if this isn't just a bad night? What if the thing that had always saved me, the voice, the stage, the applause, could no longer carry the weight I kept piling onto it? From the other side of the wall, I could hear the crowd still cheering, chanting my name. They wanted more. I wasn't sure how much I had left to give. And in the silence between those notes, I felt it clearly for the first time. Something was breaking, and no amount of applause could drown it out. The hallway outside my dressing room smelled like hairspray, sweat, and something metallic. Maybe nerves, maybe memory. I closed the door behind me and locked it, not because anyone was coming in, but because I needed the illusion of control. The room was quiet.
Too quiet.
I sat in front of the mirror and studied my reflection. The makeup was flawless, carefully applied to survive heat, lights, and tears that were never supposed to fall. My eyes, though, they told a different story. They always did if you looked long enough. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. She looked strong, untouchable, like someone who had everything under control. She wasn't. I reached for a bottle of water, took a sip, and felt my hands tremble again. I pressed them together, trying to still them. Somewhere down the hall, people were laughing, celebrating the show, reliving moments that would become memories for them. For me, the night felt unfinished, unsettled. A knock came at the door. "You good?" a familiar voice asked. Management. Concerned, but careful. There was always a balance, caring just enough, never too much. "I'm fine," I said automatically. The words slipped out with practiced ease. They always did. The door opened anyway. A smile appeared, followed by praise, excitement, talk of ticket sales and reviews, and how the crowd had been electric. I nodded in the right places, responded when expected, played my part. Inside, something tightened. They talked about the next city, the next show, the next obligation. A future that moved forward without asking if I was ready. When they finally left, the silence rushed back in. I stood and paced the room, every step echoing too loudly. My chest felt tight, like the walls were slowly closing in. I pressed a hand against my sternum, breathing shallow, then deeper, forcing my body to obey. I had been here before. Not this exact room, not this exact night, but this feeling. The realization that something was wrong and pretending otherwise was taking more energy than fixing it ever could. I thought about the people who loved me, really loved me, and how rarely I let them see moments like this. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be weak. Mostly, I didn't want to disappoint anyone. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my life giving people permission to feel through my music, grief, joy, heartbreak, hope, while denying myself the same grace. I sang truth so powerfully that the world believed it, even when I wasn't living it. I sank onto the couch and stared at the floor. What would happen if I stopped pretending for just one moment? The thought scared me more than any bad review ever could. Outside, the crowd was slowly dispersing. The roar faded into distant murmurs, then into nothing at all. Applause, I realized, has a very short lifespan. It burns bright and disappears quickly, leaving you alone with whatever it was trying to cover. I felt exposed without it. A memory surfaced, not of a stage, but of a quiet room, years ago, where singing had felt like safety instead of obligation. Back then, my voice was a refuge. Somewhere along the way, it had become armor. Armor gets heavy if you never take it off. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel it all. The fear, the exhaustion, the sadness I'd been outrunning for years. Tears slipped down my cheeks, silent and unannounced. I didn't wipe them away. For once, I let them fall. I didn't have answers. I didn't have a plan. All I had was a truth I could no longer ignore. Applause couldn't fix what was breaking inside me. And for the first time, instead of pushing that realization away, I held on to it. Not as a solution, but as a beginning. Because sometimes, the most powerful moment doesn't happen on stage. Sometimes, it happens alone, in the quiet, when the crowd is gone and the truth finally has space to speak. Morning came without ceremony. No spotlight, no music cue, just pale sunlight slipping through the hotel curtains, landing softly on the floor like it didn't want to wake me. I lay there longer than usual, listening to the quiet hum of the city below. Cars passed. Someone laughed in the distance. Life continued, indifferent to what I had unraveled the night before. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. Messages. Missed calls. plans already forming around me without my consent. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I sat up and let my feet touch the cold floor. The chills startled me, grounding me in a way applause never could. I wrapped the robe tighter around myself and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. People were already moving with purpose, coffee cups in hand, conversations mid-sentence, unaware that somewhere above them, a woman they thought they knew was learning how to breathe again. I pressed my forehead to the glass. For years, I had mastered the art of being visible without being seen. My voice filled arenas, but my truth stayed locked away, protected by schedules, contracts, and carefully chosen smiles. Vulnerability didn't fit the brand. Honesty didn't sell the way perfection did. But perfection was costing me everything. A knock sounded at the door, softer than the night before.
Different.
Whit, a familiar voice called. Someone I trusted. Someone who had seen me without makeup, without armor. I opened the door. They paused when they saw my face. Bare, tired, honest. No stage-ready smile. No performance. "You okay?" they asked again, this time meaning it. I considered the old answer, the easy one. Instead, I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." The words didn't shatter the room. They didn't end anything. They simply existed, and that alone felt revolutionary. We sat on the edge of the bed, the space between us filled with things I had never said out loud. I talked slowly at first, afraid that if I moved too fast, I'd retreat. I spoke about exhaustion, about loneliness hidden behind constant noise, about the pressure to always be strong, about the fear of disappearing if I stopped being everything to everyone. They listened.
Not to respond.
Not to fix. Just to hear me. Something loosened in my chest. Later, alone again, I finally checked my phone. Messages from the team, reminders of rehearsals, interviews, expectations. My thumb hovered over the screen. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. What do I need? The answer didn't come instantly, but it came honestly. I needed space. I needed help. And I needed to stop confusing survival with success. I made a call, not to cancel everything, not yet, but to pause, to push back, to say, not today, without offering an excuse. The silence on the other end was heavy, surprised. Then came resistance.
Concern.
Negotiation. I held my ground. Hanging up, my hands were shaking, but this time it felt different. Not like collapse. Like release. That afternoon, I went for a walk alone. No security nearby. No cameras. Just me and the city air. People passed without recognizing me, and for once, that anonymity felt like mercy. I heard music spilling from a car window at a stoplight. Someone was singing along, off-key and joyful. I smiled without realizing it. Music wasn't the problem. Losing myself in it had been. As evening settled in, I returned to the room and sat with my thoughts. Fear still lingered. Fear of judgment, of headlines, of letting people down. But underneath it was something new. Relief. I didn't need to disappear to be real. I didn't need to be perfect to be worthy. I just needed to be seen, truly seen by myself first. That night, as the city lights flickered on, I understood something clearly. Choosing truth doesn't end your story. It finally gives it a voice. The night didn't arrive all at once. It settled slowly, like a blanket pulled gently over the city, dimming the sharp edges of the day. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, letting my eyes adjust. Silence surrounded me, not the heavy kind that presses in, but the kind that waits. For most of my life, silence had been something to fear. It left room for doubt, for questions I didn't want to answer. Noise had always been my refuge. Music, voices, applause. If the world was loud enough, I didn't have to listen to myself. But now, sitting there alone, I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was honest. I thought about the girl I used to be, singing because it felt like breathing, not because anyone was watching. Somewhere along the way, the joy had become obligation. The gift had turned into a contract. And I had confused endurance with strength. That night, I wrote for the first time in years. Not lyrics, not notes for an interview, just words meant for no one else. I wrote about fear,
About shame.
about how exhausting it was to carry an image that never slept. I didn't try to make it beautiful. I let it be true. My handwriting grew messy as the pages filled. When I finally stopped, my hands ached, but my chest felt lighter. The days that followed were quieter than my life had ever been. Fewer calls, fewer demands. Some people were confused by my distance. Others were uncomfortable. A few were supportive in ways that surprised me. And then there were the voices I couldn't escape, the ones in my own head, questioning everything. What if you lose them? What if the world moves on? What if this honesty costs you everything? I didn't have answers. But I was learning that not knowing didn't mean failing. One afternoon, I stood in front of a mirror longer than usual. No stage lights. No stylists waiting. Just me. I studied the lines under my eyes, the softness where armor used to be. I didn't look like the version of myself people expected. I looked like someone who had survived. And that mattered. I began setting boundaries, clumsy at first, then firmer. Saying no without apology. Saying yes only when it felt right. Some doors closed quietly. Others slammed. But a few opened into spaces I didn't know I needed. I sang less. But when I did, it was different. The voice was still there, rich, powerful. But now it carried something deeper. Not perfection. Presence. The sound of someone no longer hiding. I understood then that the night I stopped performing wasn't an ending. It was a crossing. A moment where the applause faded enough for me to hear my own heartbeat again. People would always have their stories about me. Their theories. Their judgments. I couldn't control that. What I could control was whether I kept betraying myself to keep the world comfortable. I chose not to. Healing didn't come like a miracle. It came in small, stubborn steps. In choosing rest. In choosing help. In choosing to tell the truth even when my voice shook. And slowly something shifted. The silence stopped being an enemy. It became a companion. Because in that quiet, I finally understood what my voice was always meant to do. Not just move the world, but tell my own truth first. And that truth, once spoken, could never be taken away.